Okay, what day is it exactly? Well, we got some preseason hockey to talk about. Didn't look good against the Kings, but the Ducks sure looked good against the Utah Hockey Club. We'll call them that for now. All that and more on this edition of Locked On Anaheim Ducks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.
You're Locked On Ducks, your daily podcast on the Anaheim Ducks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Awesome. How's it going, everyone? Welcome to Locked On Anaheim Ducks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jason Hernandez. I've been covering hockey for well over a decade. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Place your first $5 bet and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit fanduel.com to get started. So I know it's been a little bit, apologies for that, but we've got some preseason hockey to talk about. And this weekend, the actual NHL season starts. Now, I know what you're saying. The Ducks' final preseason game is Friday night, and yet the NHL schedule begins this coming weekend. Yeah, there's a couple of games out in Europe, so those are regular season games. And also, most of the league begins on Tuesday or Wednesday or Thursday. We got to wait till Saturday for the first Ducks game. The Ducks, I think, are one of the last, if not the last teams to begin their regular seasons. We got to wait a whole week while everyone else plays. But hey, you know what? That's hockey, folks. So let's get started and talk about the preseason rolling on and who's going to make it. So first, I just want to address that there was one game in particular against the LA Kings where the players that were trotted out are basically fighting for a spot on the Anaheim Ducks roster, or they are trying to make their case for a good roster spot with the San Diego Gulls. That being said, I took one of those games with an absolute grain of salt. Yes, the Ducks did lose both of those games against the Kings, but I still take those games with somewhat of a grain of salt because of who the Ducks put out there and what the Kings put out there. Now, what the Kings put out there, they had Andrzej Kopitar, they had Quentin Byfield. The Kings actually gave a you know what and tried a little bit to see what they have. As far as the Anaheim Ducks are concerned, I think they're more concerned with trying to fill out those roster spots and trying to see where certain players fit in. That was kind of the theme against or with those games. Was there any bright spots against the Los Angeles Kings? Probably not. Did some players play themselves out of the lineup? Honestly, yeah. I mean, given the personnel that was out there on the first Kings game, that's where I said, "Oh, he just played himself out of a Ducks deal." Kerry Terrance went to OHL Erie. That game at Toyota Arena, I have so many takeaways from that, so many, but that's not what this first segment's about. Um, most of the players that were trotted out on the Ducks side are players that are going to be playing at Toyota Arena later this month anyway, because most of them were assigned to San Diego. You had Connor Smith, who was assigned to San Diego right after that game, which was very disappointing. I hated to watch that. In fact, that all happened like right after the game. The game took place on Saturday, the 28th, and the roster cuts went out the following day. So Travis Howe, Tyson Hines, Ruslan Gazizov, Judd Caulfield, Dylan Hetherington, Josh Lapina, Nico Mijatovic, Roland McEwen, Sasha Pastujov, Colson Petra, Connor Smith, Jackson Weeb all went to San Diego. Yeah, I would say half of those guys, actually, no, less than half of those guys did play in the game at Ontario, and they did not look good. They didn't. They also looked even worse on the Monday game against Los Angeles Kings. So that's what I could take away from all that. As far as who will make it and who's left, um, as of right now, the Ducks they have their goalies, It's Dostal, Dansk, and Klang. It is likely going to be a Dostal Klang tandem to begin the season, with Dostal getting the majority, if not all, the starts, because John Gibson is set to return early November. So that gives Dostal how many starts? It'll give him a few. It'll give him a few starts. Defense. Defense took kind of an interesting turn, and I'll talk a little bit more about that on the second part of this podcast. Forwards. See, this is where it gets tough because guys like Sam Colangelo did look pretty solid in preseason play, but he's probably not going to make the team. Nikita Nestorenko, probably no room for him, but he looked pretty solid. Russ Johnson also looked good. Nathan Gaucher looked good. Jansen Harkins, you know what? I mean, these are all guys that could theoretically make the team if it was different a different time. I'll put it that way. But there is good news. Some guys did play a little bit more. Some guys went off of injured, not reserve, but off of injury. And one of those guys that I really like, I've always liked him, is Pavel Mintyukov. Now, Minty was injured at the start of training camp. He was injured for most of the preseason, actually came back and played and almost got into a fight against the Utah Hockey Club. He looks solid. The Ducks are going to have a couple of important decisions to make. And actually, it's funny. I did a podcast just recently that I'm actually going to put up early Friday. It'll be a two-part episode, early Friday, early Saturday, and then I'll have another one over the weekend to talk about the Ducks' final preseason game. But as far as who's going to make it on defense, good luck figuring that one out. I think I'll have more of an answer to that after the final preseason game. All right, we're going to head to the first intermission right now. Then I'm going to talk more in depth about the last couple preseason games and what actually ticked me the heck off. Stay locked in, folks. And now a brief word from FanDuel. FanDuel is America's #1 sportsbook. And hey, fans, you can start this season with a big return on FanDuel. If you're a fan of the NFL, you can get big returns there. If you're a fan of the NBA or the NHL, those seasons begin this month, in some cases this week. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play by play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's fanduel.com. That is FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook and the official sports betting partner of the Locked On Podcast Network. And please, folks, please gamble responsibly. Welcome back to Locked On Anaheim Ducks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Once again, Jason Hernandez is here. Let's talk about the preseason games. I'm going to talk for a minute about the game at Toyota Arena. There's a couple things that made me go, ugh. One of those was the lineup that the Ducks put out, and now half of those guys are cut or not going to make the Ducks roster. So what's the point? The point is to see what you got. The second game against the Los Angeles Kings in the preseason. That was bad. That was pretty bad. Now let's talk about the game against Utah whatevers. This is the Arizona Coyotes, but they're now in a different jersey, different state, different almost everything. These are still some of the guys that were pesty around the Anaheim Ducks in recent years. I think most of that is lost now that there's a new name across the chest diagonally. But looking at some of the guys that are out there, Carconi Island was alive and well for Utah Hockey Club. Will he make the big club in Utah? Will he go back to the AHL and toil away with the Tucson Roadrunners? So that's always a possibility. Aside from that, who the heck else did Utah put out there? I mean, they put out a pretty solid lineup. They had Dylan Genther out there. They had former Duck Andrew Agozzino. Yeah, that guy. That guy who's now playing in Utah and spent a cup of coffee with the Anaheim Ducks a few years ago. So good to see Ags doing pretty well. Carconi Island, I mentioned. By the way, Agozzino got one of the goals for Utah in that game. The other goal went to Kyler Yamamoto of Utah Hockey Club. So they've got a little bit of speed, but the Ducks also have some speed on this. Um, oh, geez. Sorry. I got to go back to the game at Toyota Arena. The the game against Los Angeles Kings. Let him fight. Just please let him fight. There's a quote from Drew Doughty about 4 years ago, I want to say. About 4 years ago. No, 5 years ago. Because that quote took place right before the All Star break in 2020. And Drew Doughty liked the safe ones. He liked the safe fights. That's according to Drew Doughty. I kind of buy it and I kind of don't. I mean, part of me wishes that fighting would go out of the game, but at the same time, beat his ass, Seabass, that kind of mode. I'm okay with the fighting still for the reason that you are there to defend your teammates. However, on that weekend game at Toyota Arena, we could have seen one of the best fights out there. And I know the refs and linesmen are trained to stop any kind of fight. I get that. I get what the goal is for the NHL. But you had Jacob Doty on one side, you had Jacob Doty over here, and you had Connor Smith over here. And I'm thinking Connor's probably going to get cut. He's got to make the most of this, and he really made the most of this, causing a little bit of blood to trickle out. That would have been fun, but no, we got no fights. And Doty versus anybody is a heavyweight matchup. But you put Doty against Connor Smith, then you could expect some massive, massive fireworks that just didn't happen. So I know some fans were kind of turned off by that. Like, where's the fight? You're not going to allow them to fight. Okay, yeah, they didn't allow it. They're not going to the rest of the season. But then the game against Utah crushed them. Everybody was firing on all cylinders, and we also had a couple of faces that are back in the lineup. Pavel Mintyukov, as I mentioned, was back in the lineup. So good to see Minty doing fairly well. And then obviously you have your veterans for the Ducks. Oh, by the way, speaking of that Utah game, Cutter Gauthier got a goal on that one. He didn't have nearly as many shots on goal as he did before. Only wound up with 3 shots on goal. Ooh, 3 shots on goal. Nikita Nesterenko looks solid. Cutter Gauthier, I will keep mentioning time and time and time and time and time again. But Minty had a slick move. So did Beckett Seneca, looking really good on the makeshift shootout between both teams. And Kyler, I mean, Yams looked good. He looked really good. A player that is kind of ready to be out there and play again. Yeah. Oh, by the way, how about Alex Killorn? Multi-point game on this one. That was pretty impressive. There was one other player that impressed me a lot more than I anticipated. So I will call him out. Jackson Lacombe. Jackson Lacombe, I think, has absolutely earned himself a starting spot for the Anaheim Ducks this coming. Okay, not starting, but he will be in the lineup on opening night. So I will give my preemptive congratulations to Jackson Lacombe making the team, which I'm anticipating he's going to do. Yes, I know there's still a preseason game left, but hey, let me believe here. Let me believe, please. So a very impressive win against Utah Hockey Club, 5-2 on their penultimate preseason game before starting the actual action. All right, we are going to head into the second intermission, and we've got to talk music, folks. We'll get to that on the other side. Welcome back to Locked On Anaheim Ducks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Once again, you're locked in with Jason Hernandez. Let's talk about it. Music. Jason, why are you talking about music? This is a Ducks podcast, not a music podcast. Well, that was before the Ducks up and decided to change everything because, of course, they wanted to come back and change everything. Of freaking course they did. So let's start with goal song. So the goal song is no longer Bro Him. No longer. What are they replacing it with? We don't know because we hardly heard the goal song. Um, but yeah, it is now Coming for You by The Offspring. All right, that's an okay song. Maybe I can grow to live with that. I mean, I will always enjoy Bro Him, but teams go in different directions. So now it is Coming for You by The Offspring. There was another change. This one involved the goal song. So the goal song as of right now is Play Sweetness. And it usually Play Sweetness by Jimmy Eat World. Nope. They replaced it with Hella Good by No Doubt. Oh, what are we doing? What are we doing? For some reason, Hella Good doesn't sound like the kind of song that would get fans all riled up after a big win. Sweetness at least had those kind of kicks in the song. I like that one a lot. So, why change a good? Well, okay. I would think the reason they changed it is because of luck. That's kind of been the Duck staple for the past few seasons, and it's gotten no better. In fact, it's gotten worse. Yeah. So, new music altogether. Do you like it? Do you hate it? By the way, the two new songs, instead of Bro Him, it is now Coming for You by The Offspring. Instead of Sweetness by Jimmy Eat World, it is now Hella Good by No Doubt. All right. What do you think? Good, bad, meh? Give it time. I will give it a chance. That's going to do it for this podcast. Kind of a shorter one here. We're going to have an interview with, the next episode is going to be an interview episode. So be sure to be on the lookout for that. That was with Emily Wilson of the Sporting Tribune. We talk everything related to the Ducks, also make some predictions. So that's going to be a fun one to check out. Also, you can follow me on Twitter X at StimpyJD. The show's Twitter X is at LO_Ducks. There it is. You could email me at lockedonanaheimducks@gmail.com. And just once again, thank you all sincerely so very much from the bottom of my heart. I really, really appreciate it. For Locked On Anaheim Ducks, I'm Jason Hernandez saying have a great rest of the day. Please remember to be safe out there. Please be kind to one another, and Ducks fly together.